How's it going, everyone? Sorry about the technical difficulty tonight. The music was not working, but here it is. I'm DJ Aceman alongside the legendary Life of Big Don here today for the Peace and Chaos program. Hope everything is going on. Hope everything is well. Hope your summer has been going well. And Big Don, what's going on?
We're back. Happy Juneteenth to everyone that's celebrating out there. We appreciate you guys for tuning in. I want to also give a huge shout out to Liam. Happy birthday, Liam, if you are listening to this.
Yes, happy birthday. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in right here, right now. Just sorry about that little technical glitch. We had a little bit of an issue with playing the audio tonight, but thank you all for bearing with us. So right before we start, as always, go follow us on Twitter, Peace and Chaos P1. That is Peace and Chaos P1. You can always go check us out on there. And we always do polls and other interactive things to always get our followers and everyone else a part of the Peace and Chaos community involved. Also, go follow us on Instagram as well, Peace and Chaos _podcast. That is Peace and Chaos _podcast. We always put the our different thumbnails. It's like a thumbnail archive and other things as well. So you can always go check us out. And we also do the polls on Instagram as well. Now, today we're going to be discussing a lot of different things. Today is Juneteenth, which has now become a federal holiday. We're going to discuss a little bit about that this podcast. And we're also going to be discussing a little bit about the G7 and also President Biden's historic meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin that happened earlier this week as well. Just again, and a reminder, you can always go check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and on YouTube as well. And also go utilize the live chat as well. All right, let's get right into it. Let's talk first about the G7, which happened last weekend and it ended early this week. This year it was in Cornwall, England, in the southern part of England, which is it's known for its beaches and it's also a pretty nice area. And this year, all seven democratic countries, the Big Seven, met this year in Cornwall to discuss several things, including the coronavirus, democracy, international security, and also green energy as well. So we discussed a little bit about this, I believe, last week and the week before, but I just want to get Big Don in here. So Big Don, I don't know if you've checked in on the G7, but just from the policies that they were discussing this week, from global economic policy to the coronavirus, what are some things that you see after the coronavirus that a lot of the international community needs to work on?
Well, the international community needs to focus. I think the big focus from the COVID takeaways was a huge prioritization on healthcare and funding research to prevent sort of other pandemics from happening like this. Now, I think the likelihood of like once in a generation pandemic is not really around the corner. It's best for countries to prepare for that. And let's see here. Let's go into the specific policies here that they proposed during the G7 in regards to COVID-19.
Let's talk a little bit about that. A lot of it is talking a lot about I hear COVID-19. A lot of it is talking about just economic policy towards China. This is kind of more of just a quick overview of the G7 for people who don't know. This was actually known as the G8 before, but Russia was kicked out after their annexation of Crimea in 2014. This just goes a little bit into detail about some of the things that are challenges. And they also just talk a little bit about that. So this is kind of more of a projection of the G7. It talks a little bit about what happened, but this one is a good one as well. This one is what is the G7 and why it's there this year. So it's kind of more of questions, but a lot of them were talking about the COVID recovery and how like a stronger healthcare system would, protect a lot more citizens in these various modernized countries. And I know you just brought that up with how if we put more money towards our healthcare systems, how that type of health infrastructure may actually help us, countries like the United States and also countries hit hard England was hit hard for a little bit, and some EU countries as well, specifically Italy. But what this, what how our preparation for the next pandemic is going to look like, because it might be next 100 years, but we could have another pandemic in the next 10 years. If something happens like it happened,
or any other
last
viral
year.
disease.
Hmm.
Like, for example, I mean, even though they haven't really resulted in anything similar to what happened to COVID-19. I mean, think about all the diseases that happened during the last couple, ever since the millennia. You go back to diseases like swine flu, you go back to Ebola. All these diseases are starting to pop up more and more as we go further on to life here. I mean, and there's definitely a concern in terms of from a healthcare perspective of okay, we have our populations are growing in specific, in definitely parts of specific parts of the world, particularly in regions like China and India, but also in the U.S. as well, because we have this. Actually, we don't really have that much like a fairly high densely populated areas, but there's definitely areas where that could be destabilizing from a healthcare perspective and also an economic perspective when you look at the damage that COVID has done. And so I think it's always good to have precautions in place in case events do like that happen again.
I'd agree as well. Yeah, I think that with countries, I mean, like the United States, there are some more populous areas and metropolitan areas, but I think a lot of communities, we never have seen a pandemic like this. We've never experienced one. And with limited information about the coronavirus, I think that a lot of people at first, we were really ill prepared. We did not have enough funding for our hospitals, not enough respirators. We were really ill prepared, and we didn't even have like proper PPE to begin with as well. So I think that a lot of our next preparation is going to be towards how much money do we have saved for another pandemic. Are we going to have enough respirators? Are we going to have enough PPE to keep all healthcare workers safe? um, Also, what is the public policy going to be things when something like this happens? Because I know in New Zealand, they had a very quick response. They
They
shut
did.
everything down, and they pretty much quarantined everyone. And they did a really, I would say, I commend them on what they did. They did a great job. And they had like a really uniform policy. Everyone was really ready to go into it. I think for the most part, it was everyone had to wear a mask. I mean, they had enough PPE to begin with, and they were actually prepared,
Right.
unlike a country like the US and Brazil, who are very unprepared. And I think it shows you how much they saved for their budget in terms of preparation for a pandemic, if there ever was one, health emergency. And I think that a lot of the countries, and I think after we deal with the pandemic, I think that a lot of countries in the future are going to really put more money into um, how they, answer these types of pandemics and public health crises. All right,
Yeah.
let's talk. Let's
Let's.
talk. Let's talk a little bit about just um, let's see here. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about it said here energy as well. And I know that we always talk a little bit about energy and how, Europe right now is kind of the leader in energy, but I
Yep.
just wanted to get your thoughts on like so far what the United States has done and also like where we can go with energy for the future and how, like the G7, how I know that Biden really wants to become more green with the way that we got into Paris climate again, but just on a global stage, how the US can become a leader again.
Well, it requires taking initiative, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure if from like a practicality standpoint, I'm not really sure if the U.S. is going to take much initiative because
Mm,
the issue of like energy is so bipartisan. No, not bipartisan, partisan.
partisan, yep.
Jeez. And I mean, right now Biden is facing a pretty steep obstacle in terms of getting his, I guess, his energy bill passed. His climate.
Hmm.
Even right now with the infrastructure bill, it's still being in the process of negotiation. There hasn't really been a lot of progress since we last covered it.
Yeah.
Going on with the infrastructure bill. And I'm assuming there's going to be a similar response to the climate bill. So I'm not sure if the. I think there's obviously steps we could take to becoming more green, but I think we have a long way to go in terms of being I guess, the world leader
Mhm.
in sustainability with energy sources.
I agree. I agree.
I
I
think
think that, yeah, yeah, go ahead.
I think it's going to have to take a lot more of a collective effort on on all these countries to put some pressure. This is kind of where the usefulness of the Paris Climate Accords come in. We want we want alliances with other countries that are going green because we want them to serve as like uniform examples of how green energy should be implemented. Obviously, I think we could be a leader in terms of the technology that's going on because the U.S. is definitely number one in terms of innovation. I'm not sure there's any
Mhm.
stats to back it up, but I'm a proud American, so I could say that.
Mhm.
And then I think it's going to put some pressure on countries like China, which are still number one in terms of emissions. U.S. is still number two, which is also
Mhm.
part of the reason why I think we won't become like the world leader, so to say, in terms of providing cleaner energy. But from the but there's definitely, I mean, I think with the G7, I think it definitely reassures that everyone's kind of on the same page of like, okay, what exactly do we need to be investing in? What's the severity of the threat of climate change as well? Which I think I think not a lot of countries realize, especially developing countries around the world. They're like saying like, oh hey, this could have like huge implications on my country as well. I mean, think about all the stuff like mass migration that takes place because of climate change,
Yep.
and people are forced to move to certain places, and that can be damaging to countries. I mean, there's a whole entire. I mean, there's definitely steps to get there, but I think what the G7 is doing here is definitely reassuring that we take those precautions and we strive towards having a cleaner environment for everyone around the world.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that a lot of people undermine what you just stated with how climate change has a lot of adverse effects that we probably wouldn't think of, with migration, how people who live in more, seaside areas or areas that are more low lying, how they're in more of a danger of rising sea levels. And then you also have issues regarding countries or just areas that are
Yeah, think about
affected.
all the countries that rely on ecosystems for trade. I mean, think about all the countries we export raw materials from. What's
Mhm.
going to happen to those sort of like foresty climates that we see?
Yeah, and also I was going to say too is that think of the countries though that are being affected by a lot of adverse changes in climate. I mean, you see it too here in the U.S. In the southern part of the U.S., especially over the past couple of years, we've seen bigger, powerful hurricanes. We saw it 2017 with Hurricane Harvey. We've seen it with in Puerto Rico with Hurricane Maria as well. And I mean, with as people know, with like the science behind it, is that warmer waters, take more moisture, and with that, you get more powerful storms. And with that, you're going to be seeing a lot more adverse that, and you can see it with the monsoon season in India as well, and how they've been seeing a lot of crazy weather patterns over the years with how powerful their monsoons are, and then they see a lot of dry seasons. So it also affects the agriculture there as well, which goes in and it takes a hit at the economy as well. And I think that is something we have to be aware of as well, because although some people, I think more people are becoming aware of um, climate change and the effects of it. I think a lot of people don't see that there's a clear connection between that and also how it's going to affect waves of migration and the economy. I don't think that people understand that it can
No,
affect.
people don't really understand the
Mhm.
economic impact that this could have. Oftentimes, people argue from like an anti-climate change perspective that hey, we're forcing all these policies. Well, what's that going to do to our economy? That's an argument you often hear from the conservatives, especially when it comes to the Paris Climate Accords.
Yep, yep.
And we already kind of debunked that theory. I think on stream. Did
Yeah,
we?
we defunked it on stream. I believe it was last week. I think we talked about it, and then we talked
That's
about it
right.
maybe like a couple weeks prior to that as well. But I think we could definitely do like a whole, stream about climate policy and stuff. I think we talked about it. Um can't remember when we did, but I know that we did. Maybe we talked about it a little bit with Cancun cruise episode
Yeah, Cancun cruise.
when Texas saw those that big ice storm or snowstorm from
Mhm.
February. I think we talked a little bit about that as well. But other than that, we have debunked a lot of those thoughts with the Paris Climate Agreement and how it's non-binding as well. So you could go in there and technically break a lot of rules, and all you're doing is kind of hurting the policy. You're not really hurting, anything in particular. You're not like breaking the law. You're just kind of making yourself look kind of bad. But I think a lot of people do see it as limiting into the way of our economic growth. But
Yeah,
there's other ways around it. If you have clean infrastructure, you're gonna have no problem.
right. That's definitely true. And going back to the idea of infrastructure. I mean, we need to update our infrastructure in general because I think there's an interesting stat out there that it says like the average bridge is like 43 years old with the average life expectancy of like 50
Wow,
in the US.
that's
So
bad.
it is bad. We don't want bridges crumbling. People will rely on that stuff every day.
Hmm.
And also our roads and transportation, like I think it was like 1/3 of our highways are considered like dangerous to drive on because the amount of repair and potholes that form.
Hmm. That is not good. And we a lot of people. I mean, most people here who listen and everyone else probably has driven on a highway at least once in their life. But some people do it every single day, commuting to work, commuting to school, and I mean, you see how important it is to everyday people. And
Hmm.
we have these, really getting old, bridges now and streets. And I mean, that's not safe to drive on. While you have other countries right now, building. You see China, they've been building a lot of new streets and highway systems since 2000 in the southern and western parts of the country. They've been doing it near Tibet. They've been doing it near the border of India as well. You've seen like what they have done, and they really have put a lot into their infrastructure, and they recognize the importance of it. But I think with the U.S. here in this infrastructure bill, I think that we're also seeing that we need to stay relevant with the rest of the world, and some states are really lacking in terms of infrastructure, and no one wants to drive on a road that is considered not safe
Right.
because that's just going to affect a lot of people's safety. And I think as a leader, if the U.S. wants to be a leader, they really need to upgrade their infrastructure.
Exactly. I think. We're kind of delving into domestic policy here, but
Mhm.
I think going back to the G7 here. They do have an emphasis on combating climate change. I think that was definitely a big point.
Mhm.
It's definitely refreshing to see after we had the Trump administration and him kind of like saying, "Oh, okay, I'm not going to rely on sort of these global affairs to dictate what's in the best interest of what I think is the best interest of the country."
Mhm. Yeah, and yeah, going off of that, I think that with the Biden administration, I think that there have been a lot of changes already. You've heard in the media as well how the G7, is felt normal again.
Yep.
But I think that the U.S. of the past with Trump, they faced a lot of the same issues that the U.S. with under Biden faced today. So although it's a new leader, it's the same problems. We've been dealing with a lot of these problems for years now. I mean, they also talked about terrorism. I mean, we've seen terrorism, you know, frankly, under since Bush, at least when it became very prevalent. But also with energy policy, that's been big since the 70s.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, we've seen a lot of the same issues, just a new president with you know, probably a new set of incentives in order to um, tackle these new issues. And I think that, looking ahead, I know that the Biden administration has a lot to unpack. And, although it might seem refreshing for some people, the Biden administration is going to have to do a lot of work in order to fix this. And also the weight of the G7 and also the G20 nations and also everyone a part of the UN is also going to have to pull their weight in order for us to even mitigate the effects of climate change, because there are still some countries around the world that undermine the effects of climate change, and with that there's still going to be a lot of consequences that future generations are going to have to deal with.
Right.
But anyways, any last things with the G7? I mean, that was last weekend, so now it's kind of not really seeing a whole lot in the news. I
I mean,
mean,
we're still technically covering the G7 here in regards to our next topic.
yeah, we are going to talk a little bit about that. As everyone knows, President Biden was on his big European like tour for the past 2 weeks now, and he just came back just a couple days ago. But our next topic we're going to talk about is something, as you can see in our title as well, was the big Biden Putin summit. So
Hmm.
2 years ago or 3 years ago, President Trump and President Putin met in Helsinki. This was met with a lot of speculation by the media, specifically with how President Trump and Putin did a joint press conference, and President Trump made a big statement about siding with the Russians about election integrity. Now, this time around, President Biden and President Putin decided not to do a joint conference. They did two press conferences separately, and they met for about 3 hours, I believe, in Geneva on Wednesday. A lot of things were discussed, including human rights, cyber attacks, and also COVID and China as well. They talked a lot about all those topics into detail. President Biden brought up a lot about human rights, specifically with the recent arrest of opposition leader in Russia, Alexei Navalny, while President Putin also made some interesting statements regarding race relations in the United States, which I think we can get into as well. Um, but yeah, first off, Big Don, let's go to our poll first, because we did do a poll this week. We did a double poll this week. We'll
Yep.
get into a little bit of that as well a little bit later. But our first one was the Biden Putin summit a success? We asked this on June 17th. There's 22 hours left. So if you guys want to do it right now, you can go, feel free to go to our Twitter right now. Yeah, we did a couple more days for this one, but so far we do have 7 responses. Turns out right now 57.1% of the folks on Twitter said that it was absolutely a success, while 42.9% of our recipients said that it was not a success. So we had some mixed reviews on this. I think that this kind of shows that some people, I think a lot of people take, who maybe view, international relations with a grain of salt. Some might say, yeah, it was nice that they did meet, but nothing really major came out of it besides the U.S. Allowing, and the Russians allowing the diplomats back. Other than that, we didn't really get a whole lot in terms of. It was just more of like a meeting and getting to see face to face. After a big monumentous year in the United States. But I'm not really too surprised that we had absolutely not at all. It was kind of split. I think that it was very split in terms of the US as well. I don't know. After watching the news this week as well, both conservative and liberal news, it was kind of split on this. But Big Don, I want to get you involved here. Although we only have 7 votes right now, what do you think? How do you think the public, the U.S. American public, saw the Biden Putin summit after just looking at different news sources and things like that?
Yeah, I think it's a very neutral response in terms of what went down. There's definitely a mix of opinions. I think I think more so. I think there's definitely some people that definitely took it as like a negative connotation, especially when it came to Biden's interaction with the press. He was mad that day. I'm telling you.
He was boiling. You saw his snap. He snapped at Caitlin Collins of CNN.
Well,
Like, he snapped
I
at her.
think Biden actually generally called her Caitlyn Bennett.
Did he?
I heard that somewhere. I don't. Let's see here, Caitlyn.
I mean, the thing was that he snapped at her because I think she asked a question about, oh, as Putin's like, have you changed your mind about Putin? something like that. And he says, you have no idea, you don't like know what you're talking about. Like you're in the wrong business, something like that. And like, I think we've seen it too with like Biden and how he can get a little bit unhinged sometimes. Like we saw that with the
Oh, geez, it was
Charlemagne
a
the
meme
God.
tweet. There you go.
Yeah, we saw that with Charlemagne the God as well. Remember in the Breakfast Club interview last year
Yeah, well,
when he said, "If you don't vote for me, you ain't black." He kind of got sassy, and then he had to apologize, and he had to apologize after this as well. He apologized, I believe, to the whole news corps because he kind of did snap. But yeah, that was a little bit of a weird episode there. But yeah, I was like, huh, maybe he had a bad day or something. I don't know. But
we don't know what went down, but I mean, well, I'd say there was really any sort of progress there. Not really.
yeah, I mean, I don't think a lot of people had high hopes though for this.
Yeah, it was kind of the point where it's like, okay, don't make any of them angry, and then Biden got angry.
Also, yeah, I mean, since he is kind of older too, maybe he was just sleep deprived, stressed out as well. Maybe he just had like a tough day. But I mean, at this Putin, this was probably one of the most hyped up things this week on the news. I think it was the hypest thing on the news besides ending of the G7 summit. Besides that, this was it. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, all you saw was Biden, Putin, Biden,
What?
Putin, Biden, Putin.
The lead up to Biden
The
Putin.
lie, it was like the hype of like a UFC fight.
It was like a fight. So that's why we made this thumbnail.
Yeah, I mean, it did feel like a little bit of a fight in a way because just with the whole hype, and then you saw like different news sources. I mean, you saw
This
like,
was Jake Paul, Floyd Mayweather stuff right there.
oh, this was
Jake Paul. Why am I so off today? It's a Logan. Jeez.
Logan Paul. They had a fight last week, or no, 2 weeks ago now. Yeah, but this was like the fight of the summer, but it was like more of the diplomacy. But it was like the Super Bowl in a way. It was like the U.S. and Russia. But I don't know when Biden is going to meet with President Xi, but that one is going to be big too if they do decide to meet.
Oh yeah, for sure. Especially when it comes to changing administrations. I mean, we got to figure out the tone these presidents want to set for these two individual countries because I mean
Mhm.
they're our biggest rivals right now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, with this one going back to the Russia U.S. one as well. I mean, this week a lot of people were looking at the body language of Biden and Putin. Some said Putin was looking scared. Others said Biden was looking a little dazed and confused. Uh, I don't know. I mean, body language can indicate a lot, but sometimes it's more of what how significant it was because although body language it doesn't really communicate anything orally, it does show you sometimes of how the mood is and how people are feeling. But I think it's more of what progress you got out of it, if it benefits your country or not. And that's kind of the way of diplomacy and just in general, negotiating and who's a good negotiator in this sense. I mean,
Now the weird thing is, I'm not sure if you heard of this, but Biden did freeze military aid to Ukraine after the Putin summit.
oh, I heard about that. Yes, I did.
Let's go look into that. I think that's pretty significant.
Yeah, let's go look into that a little bit here. I saw a little bit of that, but let's go check that out in one sec. Here we go. Just getting this loading. All right. Here we go. Yeah, this is from Politico. I mean, a lot of different ones have seen this. I did see this today, but I didn't really talk too much about it. Um, yeah, this is going to be White House freezes Ukraine military package that includes lethal weapons. Officials prep $100 million worth of arms as Russia massed troops on the border, then put it on pause as the Biden Putin summit approached. Oh, National Security Council directed officials to put the package together as Washington grew increasingly concerned over a massive Russian military buildup near the border with Ukraine and in the Crimean Peninsula, according to three of the people who, like the others, asked not to be named in order to speak candidly about internal discussions. Officials at the State Department and Pentagon worked to assemble the proposal. Wow, this is pretty significant. Um, Yeah, since Russia's 2014 invasion of Ukraine and annexation of Crimea, the U.S. has provided some $2.5 billion in military aid to Kiev, including unarmed drones, radios, and Javelin anti-tank missiles. The latest proposal came about after Russia staged more than 100,000 troops, along with rocket battalions and heavy armor units near Ukraine's border this spring, according to estimates. In late April, Russia's defense ministry announced that it would begin withdrawing some of the troops. And I mean, I don't know if you, I saw this on the news as well. I know that Putin was like bringing more people, more troops near the border of Ukraine as well. This was about like a month right before the whole summit with Biden. He did this as well, and I think a lot of people were thinking that this was going to be maybe like a power move here, but now since it seems like maybe there's a little bit of detent, a little bit, maybe a little bit less aggression. But again, I mean, we'll see it when time comes as well, because they might just do this now and then 6 months later, they'll probably start bringing troops back, and then it'll get a little bit more tenser. But I mean, right now, just after a big summit, it is a little bit of show of a diplomacy, not to really get involved and, flex your muscles right after you had a big summit, because it kind of sends the wrong message to each respective party.
Yeah, I think you nail it on the head in terms of diplomacy, but I think this could also have some implications for obviously the situation that's going on in Ukraine. I mean, it's very difficult to gauge foreign policy from the perspective of, okay, do we want to, is it a question of whether or not to provoke the Russians after we meet Putin, or is it like, or do we actually try to help the Ukrainians in terms of their effort to fend off Russian military troops?
Yeah, that's true. And I also was watching the nightly news as well, and they actually interviewed. This was probably last week. I was watching. I don't really watch a whole lot of the news as of lately. I've been a little bit busy, but I did watch the nightly news about a week and a half ago, and they actually interviewed a Ukrainian sergeant,
Hmm.
and they interviewed him, and it was talking a little bit about Russian Ukrainian relations and how those have kind of gone into the back burner, like not great. And they asked him a question about, do you think the US should really take Russia seriously in terms of being a threat? And they said, well, look, back in 2014, no one saw this coming with the annexation of Crimea. He says, and the guy said, if they took Crimea, they can certainly take all over Ukraine. They can take Latvia, they can take Belarus, and then, they're going to go further and further west. And this was about NATO and how Ukraine would really love to join NATO, but how that would send a really bad message towards Russia. And it would probably ignite the Ukrainian Russian uh, disputes going on right now, and have been going on for the past 7 years at least. And I mean, it's if it does happen, it's going to definitely make matters a lot worse. It's going to make things a lot more complex. The U.S. is going to be they're going to have a big, void to try to fill. It's going to put them in jeopardy in a lot of ways if the U.S., if they do allow Ukraine. I mean, there have been talks about this for years now. If NATO were to allow um, Ukraine to come in. And I could pull up an image too about NATO countries and just show you what the geography looks like. We can pull that up really quick. I could pull that up. Hold
All
on.
right.
I'll pull that up right now. Yeah, because right now, uh,
There you go.
there you go, right here. So the current NATO countries, for those who are not aware, US and Canada out of North America, Iceland, you have the United Kingdom, you have Norway, Sweden is not a part of it. And then you have some of the former Soviet blocs in the north. You have Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. You have Poland as well. Belarus will not become a part of it because of their current dictator. And then you have some promised invitation is Ukraine, Georgia is also a part of it as well. Armenia is a part of it as well. Um, and then also you have to the south of Russia, you have Turkey as well, who's a part of it. Greece, Albania, Macedonia is invited. And then you have some Yugoslav countries, Romania, Bulgaria, Croatia, Slovenia, and then a bunch of other Central European countries as well. But the ones that Russia does really not like, and they felt that this was a big threat in 2004, was in the early 2000s, was when Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania joined. And those were former Soviets about a decade and a half before. And you can see it right here as well. This one was when. So, yeah, 2004, they had the enlargement of former Balkan countries. Balkan countries. And then you also had some former Soviet nations as well, specifically with Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And that alarmed Russia right then and there with the whole foreign policy. And that's why, also, if you do invite Ukraine into, if you invite them into NATO, they're going to, although they're going to have a lot of perks in terms of security and military assistance, what message does that send to Russia? And how will that, worsen the relationship between Russia and Ukraine, and also
Right.
the U.S. and Russia as well, because the U.S. is pretty much the captain of NATO. You also have France and Germany and the United Kingdom as well that are pretty big players, but it's really not going to help the U.S. and Russia out if they ever want to get back and become good friends, if they ever are. And that's the whole geo complexity with this, and that's why if you have a whole focus on Ukraine, Russia really would like to have their sphere of influence,
Exactly.
getting into these former satellite, they call them the satellite countries, specifically, they see that the Baltic countries of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania in the Baltic region, they see them as a lost cause at this point because they got out of it quickly. But they still want to have a sphere of influence over Belarus and, Ukraine and also Georgia as well. So that's why they try to intervene into it. And that's why you really need to surveil Ukraine Russian relations if you're the Biden administration. That was my little spiel here, but
There
send it
you go.
right
That
back.
was a good spiel.
Yes, that was the little spiel here. But anyways, so yeah, this week there was a lot of discussions. Ukraine was also a big one. We saw issues regarding cyber attacks, the current cyber attacks we discussed a couple weeks ago on the show. We saw JBS get hacked. You also saw some transportation systems in the U.S. get hacked as well, specifically the Vineyard cruise ships. But looking ahead here, cyber attacks are going to be one of the big security threats for the U.S. and other countries as well. And a lot of these, big cyber groups, they might be sponsored by the Kremlin or they might have some ties to Russia. So also President Biden did discuss this with President Putin. But I want to talk a little bit about something, unless you have something to say, Big Don, about what President Putin said about the U.S., because I think that this is really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think in terms of the policy going forward, we're good. I think this is obviously issues we're going to be going back and forth for a while at in terms of both our policy, in terms of dictating those regions within the Baltics, and then what's going on the other side of. I'm tempted to say Iron Curtain there, but in terms of what's going on in Russia.
Uh huh. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, this is like the former Iron Curtain right here. Yeah, Poland was even involved in Russia. East Germany was involved as well. And it's that whole sphere of influence and the role of history as well. And the way
Mhm.
that, Russia used to be, well, the Soviet Union used to be the big dog up until when it started breaking up in the late 1980s. And since then, as we know, how much history has changed. But it's also that mentality of the Russians as well. And I think Putin, I did a project on this. So I don't know if you know, Putin's from St. Petersburg, and there are a lot of academics see Putin similar to Peter the Great in the way that he wants to strengthen um, the European, um, sphere with Russia. And I mean, you see it with this whole project with, the gas, I think it's the gas line that's going to go from central Germany to, well, Russia to central Germany because of how much oil and gas Russia has. And this is one big project that Putin believes could strengthen them, and how back in the day, Peter the Great actually used to, bring people in from the Netherlands and Prussia and Germany into his country because he saw the importance of becoming a global country. So that's kind of like the whole thing as well. It's this kind of historic mentality as well that Russia wants to stay dominant. They do not want to fail. And the 1990s are over now, and Russia wants to rebuild. And they still see that there's a potential in the 21st century.
Right? They never lost that mindset of being a global superpower.
And the U.S. does as well. And I think there's a lot of countries out there. I mean, you see it. I think with the European countries, it's kind of more known at this point. Populations have kind of decreased in a way in a lot of European countries. And although they do have pretty significant economies, we're in a new wave of international politics, specifically with the rise of China and the rise of India, too. Don't forget India.
Oh yeah, they're going to be a big player in the next 5 to 10 years, if you ask me.
Yeah. And I think that although, Russia still is relevant in a way, I think that people, sometimes it's that historic way of Russia and how it used to be the big superpower, and how, although it does have um, things to be concerned about with WMDs, pretty big military, its economy is not on the same scale as the US. They actually have had some issues with their economy in the 1980s, 1980s and 90s. And also, I think just looking at it as well, I don't think Russia is as big as a threat as people think of it is, although they do have a lot of, security threats with the U.S. in terms of the role of harboring, cyber terrorists and, human rights abuses. I think the U.S. really needs to focus on China. And I think that although this was important to meet with Russia, China is going to be our biggest competitor economically, militarily, and also sphere of influence. Because a lot of people, we can go on detail here, but I think China has the biggest sphere of influence coming into the next decade, hands down.
Yeah, because they have so much economic leverage on the rest of the world.
They literally have Africa, like all of Africa, by the strings at this point with how, they're coming in. They're building a lot of different institutions and also doing a lot of business deals in Africa. And that also is going to be a big player as well. And how a lot of African nations right now, you know, it's not really reported a whole lot because it doesn't really get a whole lot. But a lot of China does see a lot of potential in Africa in terms of extracting natural resources and also doing a lot of business in Africa. And they see that maybe manipulating the governments there as well will play into their part. So that's also something to worry about if you're on the US side or, European or even Russian too. I think that China is going to be the country that's going to be the biggest in the world. I mean, by population, it already is, but economic, military, political powerhouse, influence, it is going to be there.
Slowly but surely.
Slowly. Yes, 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 yes. All right. So see a little bit here. Um, yeah, it's just going a lot into about just the Trump going back in time here. Putin, we talked a little bit about Putin, Biden, how we talked about the name calling before this convention even or the summit occurred. Uh, Biden called Putin a killer, and then Putin called Biden, well, you know what? It takes one to know one. So, early on, even before this was even announced, I believe, Biden has been very critical of Putin. Uh, and you saw that with human rights and the role of the democracy, how, you know, democracy has dwindled in Russia. I think since the 90s, they have had weaker elections over the years. It's been determined. Also, yeah, it also, Putin's been in office for 17 years, and he actually set up the Constitution, I believe, in the early or later 2010s, which allowed him to, seek another term. And that just shows how undemocratic he is. And Biden also talked about that and talked with that about Putin as well. Talked about how undemocratic he is and how that's going to hurt the role of democracy in the future and how Russia really is not a leader in democracy. And I think the U.S. Also you could say that with the whole insurrection and also uh, just with all the drama that happened during the 2020 election, how now that the international community can say that about the U.S. as well now, and how unorganized our election was, how much drama occurred afterward in terms of claims of voter fraud and everything
Yep.
like that that did get disputed, but it still smeared um, the role of democracy in the U.S. And I mean, the insurrection was the cherry on top, if you will, in terms of how a lot of critics can now say that the U.S. is not, the leader in terms of democracy because of what happened. But that was another big thing in how Biden does want to change that, and how one day doesn't define a whole country. And I think that he made that known too regarding Putin and how he's an autocrat.
Yeah, I think that's also kind of the takeaway back to the G20 summit. It's like, okay, it was also prioritizing the role of reassuring democracy and making sure stuff like an insurrection never happened again.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you see a lot of destabilization around countries, not just like in the U.S., but also like Russia as well. And then you have Bolivia is also a good example of this.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, destabilization. It's clearly something that you have to look into, and it's a big concern. And I think with the G7, discussing, how the G7 really is about the seven biggest democratic nations on earth. Um, and I mean, this year we had, the UK, France, you had Germany was a part of it this year. It highlights all the nations. I
Yeah.
mean, look back, Japan, Italy, USA, EU, Germany, France, Canada, UK. And all those countries, well, I mean, the EU's, it's its own little coalition. But all those, you know, states who partook in this, they have had a long history since at least World War II of being a big leader in terms of promoting liberal democracy in the world.
Right.
And what I mean by that is advocating for human rights, um, advocating for strong, stable um, governments where everyone can have a say, and also advocating for other, more progressive, liberal type of values that
Yes.
you don't really see.
And that's where I think the destabilization comes from. We'd certainly see that within the U.S. And if you look at these world leaders, I mean, a lot of people on the right can argue like, okay, these are left wing politicians that want to push their, I guess, agenda, whatever that may be, whether it's like, I don't know, political correct agenda or climate change agenda. They want to push. They don't really care about sort of the, I guess, the little guy in sort of sense. So you definitely have populist movements, especially in America. But I think you also see this sort of taking place, especially if I were to give you an example. I mean, Boris Johnson is also a pretty good example of this in terms of what happened during Brexit.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And
Mm-hmm.
while he isn't as like, I wouldn't really call him like a far right leader. I mean, it's it's definitely a sign in terms of like, okay, what could possibly happen. And the U.S. is certainly an exception to this when we look at the presidential election of Trump and the repercussions that happened with the 2020 election.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Exactly. I think, yeah, with Boris Johnson, you can see that, in 2016 with the whole shakeup of the EU. You can also see it with France as well. I mean, they're going to have their elections coming up next year, and how 2017, I believe, was when they had their last elections, and how you had Marine Le Pen, who was kind of more of the right wing figure, really anti immigrant, and very populist in a way, and how Emmanuel Macron, who was the more centrist, while you had far left candidates who were more not really too populist, but more in a way supporters of more socialist kind of policies, but Macron was the centrist. He ended up facing Le Pen in the end, and he did end up defeating her in the runoff. But still, it shows you that populist nationalist. Um, I mean, they're emerging still. I mean, even though Biden won this time around, you have Boris Johnson in the world, and I mean, he's more moderate in some ways, but I think when you look at these leaders, and you look at the countries, France, for instance, the UK, Germany also has been seeing a lot of rise in populist nationalist movement as well.
Mhm.
I mean, the US as well. You can see some countries here. I mean, even also in the EU as well. There are some countries where you see the rise of populist leaders, and you see the rise of it because, for multiple different reasons. Maybe some people just are against globalism and the way that it has affected their livelihoods and how they see that, and they see how globalism, maybe made them become unemployed due to outsourcing, or maybe they don't
Christian.
like, yeah, they don't like globalism because of the role of immigration, multiple reasons why, and how they blame, these leaders who embraced globalism have benefited from it, but they personally have not. And therefore, you see with the UK, leaving the EU was a big, big step for them and for the populist movement. And that's something that we're going to have to look at in the future as well, and how, maybe that could produce a leader who is, might be seen as more illiberal in the way that maybe they don't really value too much of the international community in the way that, they undermine human rights in some ways. I mean, I'm just saying here, they might undermine international treaties and obligations like the Paris Climate Agreement in the case of Trump, and how they see that as undermining their ability to grow economically. You see these other things as well, but that could put in jeopardy the international community and New World Order that was established
Oh, New
after,
World Order.
yeah, after World War II.
You talking about the NWO, the Alex Jones, the globalists? They're taking over the world. I tell you, they're playing
Well, I mean
Florida.
I mean that's like one way to say, like, but it was like post World War II, when it was like the more they call it like the Bretton Woods system, the way of more democratic policies that were created to, hinder a rise of a Nazi Germany, or to contain at that time the Soviet Union.
Now I'm thinking of WWE.
Yeah, WWE, yeah, they actually, gosh, we can go on a little spear here, but WWE does take a lot of like terminology and things that you might have seen earlier on in history. Like they had a tag team group way in the past called the League of Nations, that failed international organization that failed in like the 1930s,
Yep.
that Roosevelt set up. I mean, that just was completely destroyed. But yeah, they had a group called the League of Nations of like all different wrestlers from all different parts of the world. Yeah, like a British person, you had a, I believe it was a Swiss fighter, and like an American. They call it the League of Nations. But yeah, WWE has done some
Hey, if you want to
interesting.
get into U.S. politics, kids, you can just watch WWE.
Nah, 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 nah. WWE, as fun as it is, it's could get. I mean, I think once you see that, it is fake and how it's all scripted, but a lot of people do like it, and I used to watch it when I was young. I used to watch it every Friday night when I was SmackDown. I always loved watching it, but I think when you get older, you just see that it's not that fun anymore. All righty, we just had a little bit of a.
We went on a tangent about WWE. There you go.
There you go, there you go. Yeah, and I went on a little bit of a tangent about a lot of things tonight, but yeah, let's move on here. Unless you
Real
have
quick,
anything else to say, Big Don, before we steer to domestic happenings.
let's talk about some Juneteenth.
Yes, today is June 19th, therefore it is Juneteenth. This week we did see a big, where is it? Right here. Boom.
Boom.
This week we did see big news for a lot of Americans who have been pushing and pushing and pushing to make Juneteenth a federal holiday. And this week, President Biden did sign it into law. It is now a federal holiday. So this has been the first time since 1983, since Martin Luther King Jr. Day was declared a national holiday. So this is the first, I mean, no, federal holiday since 1983. So there you go. History was made the other day. And yes, what is Juneteenth? A lot of people have been asking that, Googling that. Technically, it's the day when all slaves were free. This was in 1965, June 19th, 1865, not 1965. Yeah, and there's some back history behind it. We can read a little bit about it to educate some of us because some may not know. But when Major General Gordon Granger issued the above order, he had no idea that in establishing the Union Army's authority over the people of Texas, he was also establishing the basis for a holiday, Juneteenth, today the most popular annual celebration of emancipation from slavery in the U.S. After all, by the time Granger assumed command of the Department of Texas, the Confederate capital in Richmond had fallen. The executive to whom he preferred, President Lincoln, was dead, and the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery was well on its way to ratification.
Yep.
So, yeah, this is about
The last day where the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment reached all around the country.
It's been a big day, and we also did a little bit of a poll. I'll put it up right here.
So our poll was should Juneteenth be a federal holiday, and the majority of people, or about a third, well, a third exactly, said yes, and or 2/3, and then 1/3 said no. And even though this gets some bipartisan support,
yeah, it did.
We see some pushback in terms of this, especially amongst one of our favorite conservatives here.
Yeah, we did. We've seen a few pushback, but I think it passed the House, I believe, with only 14 votes disapproval, all from Republicans. But I mean, it passed unanimously among Democrats, and it passed. It did pretty well with Republicans as well. And you know, I'll ask you a question in a couple minutes, but I just want to look at this first. I mean, we did get 9 votes on this one. We put this out on the 16th, right? I think it was the day before it was signed into law. And
hold on, PJ. I'm going to go to the bathroom real quick.
Oh yeah, no problem, no problem.
You talk over.
All right. So yeah, right here with this whole poll, you see that we sent this out on June 16th. I think it was one day before it was actually signed into law. And as you can see, we did get 9 responses. It was pretty popular on Twitter this week. There was a lot of discussion of this early on in the week. And we also saw last year as well. I think with last year in the Black Lives Matter movement, how prevalent that was across the summer over the deaths of George Floyd and other unarmed Black people, how we saw that Juneteenth also became something prevalent. And a lot of people may have not been aware of it before because of maybe just how it wasn't considered a federal holiday. It wasn't really discussed in school as well. And I think that that was something that was very crucial in the way that a lot of people did not understand or maybe did not have an education or in their US history class were never taught about Juneteenth. Maybe they discussed the civil rights movement and Jim Crow, but they never really discussed what Juneteenth was until maybe last year. And it really brought a lot of people into the perspective of understanding what Juneteenth was, the history behind it, and also just what it means to people of color and maybe people who've had ancestors who were affected by slavery. And I think that that's why it's such a big thing this year because of everything that went on last year in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement and bringing awareness to people who may have not understood this before. And I think it's very important that this has become a federal holiday. I know I'm in support of it. I think that it should be a federal holiday. I think that all history is American history. If it did happen on this land, it is American history, good and bad. We need to come together as a nation to understand it. And therefore, I think that it should be a federal holiday. And I'm happy that it did pass bipartisanly. Now, when Big Don comes back, I am going to ask him a question regarding, why some, some bills can't even get bipartisan support, but why this gets support. And I've seen that, some commentators and just people in general believe that um, Juneteenth was passed because it's just one more day off, and they say it in a way that is pretty unfortunate. I don't know if that's the case, if that's really the country we live in the way that people just see this as a day off. But I mean, I am going to ask him that question when he comes back, and I want to hear what his response is because I think that it really is a bipartisan way of saying, you know what, all history is American history, and you know what, this needs to be a federal holiday because the last time we had a federal holiday declared was in 1983 with MLK Day, and yeah, I think that a lot of people see this just as another day off, but I think from a moral standpoint, I think that it is something that highlights our ability to take ownership of what happened. Um, Not only that, but I think that it's something to look at and to study and to really appreciate what happened and how Juneteenth has changed a lot of lives. And also to just take a step back and just reflect on it and also to study it and to learn about it because I think now that it's a federal holiday, I think that it's going to be implemented a lot more into American history and also just courses that a lot of American youth have looked into and studied. I think that's why it's such an important federal holiday. And yeah, leave what you have in the comments down below as well. Go let us know if you believe that it should be a federal holiday or shouldn't be. We did get a lot of people to respond. We got a decent amount of people for the poll question, and we are very happy because of that. All right, Big Don is coming back in right now, so I'm going to ask him the big question
It's a
about.
big question.
So the big question is, so this week, I don't know if you've seen on the news here. I heard it on a couple of news stories, but you know how you know how partisan and how interlocked Congress is.
Yep.
And at first, people were really uncertain if this was going to pass or not. And I mean, first we saw it pass in the Senate, and then I said, okay, this is going to definitely pass the House because of the Democratic majority. But a lot of people have asked the question of, do you think this was about um, really being like a moral standpoint for the U.S. in the way that this has been a big day in history, June 19th, 1865, or do you just think that a lot of politicians just see this as another day off and therefore they just did it not because they appreciated the day, but because they just saw it as another potential day off? Do you think it was that they saw it as a day off, therefore they just said, you know what, yeah, let's do it because we don't really care about this? Or do you think that people really do care about this and they think that it was worthy of a federal day, a federal holiday?
I mean, I think if I were to guess, I think like a fringe minority of people so like, okay, it's a day off. But I think there is validity to this holiday because this was a big accomplishment in U.S. history. I mean, we're talking about the day where there was no more ended slavery altogether in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I was saying this when you were gone as well, in the way that, you know, Juneteenth has, I think that a lot of people have not understood what it was maybe prior to the Black Lives Matter movement, because I think American history classes today sometimes do not talk about certain things that happen. They talk about, yeah, they talk about the Civil War, but, and maybe they talk a little bit about abolition, but they don't talk about Juneteenth. They don't really talk about, they might talk about the Emancipation Proclamation, but they don't talk
Right.
about certain things that occurred that were very prominent for Black Americans, and they never talked about. I mean, also we talked about the Tulsa riot. I mean that was not discussed in, um, at least my history class. I don't know if you learned
Neither
about that.
your mine as well.
Neither is yours, and I think this is something also in the way that we have to kind of cover all history, the good and the bad. And I mean, you see this with other countries in the world too, with Japan, and how some people have become, pretty critical of the way that there are some teachers in Japan that really shame the country for what they did in the past. And I think that, I mean, we talked about this. I think we talked about this on one of our first um, live streams, in the way that, history, I mean, unlike science, history is pretty much partisan in some ways, in the way that you can interpret history, but with science, you
Yep.
kind of don't really interpret it because it's just science, it's just universal knowledge. And the way we kind of see that with the same with history too, in the way that, you might see history as, an event that happened. Some people might see it differently than other people. They
You could
might
spin it
interpret
in
it
a way.
spin it in a way as well. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where a lot of people have become critical of, teaching something like Juneteenth or the Tulsa riot, because, then it changes somebody's perspective of
America.
America. Yeah,
Yeah, and we're definitely seeing this. This is definitely a prevalent issue right now when you look at stuff like critical race theory. Even though I don't really
exactly.
think, I don't think, I think conservatives generally overhype critical race theory. I don't think it's really that much being taught in like public schools. It's generally confined to the realm of academia.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree that I see that as well. I see like some overhyping about that. I think it's since we do live in a multicultural country and also multi-ethnic, I think race is such a, I would say, more sensitive issue, just because of how the social context of just the country we live in.
Yep.
I think that if it was discussed in another country that maybe was not as diverse, I think people would probably have no problem with it. But I think since the US is such a, I mean, also we have like a pretty mo- monumentous history as well, in the way that about all the events that have happened in the past as well. With the Civil War, we talked about abolition, first, colonization, treatment of Native Americans. There are so many different topics that a lot of people do not want to discuss because it might alter the way that we see our country today. But you have to understand how the development of the US came to be. A lot of people sometimes do not want to talk about that. And
No, not at all.
I think that's why things like Juneteenth, the Tulsa massacre, Trail of Tears, those weren't really discussed in school.
Yeah, because it kind of paints America in this negative light, which I think can do some damage. I think conservatives look at it as doing damage to our youth.
Mm-hmm. But I
Especially
think, oh yeah, you go ahead, go ahead.
when it comes to like turning to like different ideologies
Yeah,
in response to sort of this anti-American point of view. But it's real history.
yeah, I think that, yeah, and also like, do you really just want to censor your child in the way of what they think? Do you want to just censor what content they can and they can't consume? Because your child's going to figure something out later on. And I think a lot of
Yeah, we
students
have access
today,
to the internet now. It's
yeah,
you got information at your fingertips.
yeah, and I think that with our, I would say maybe the, older Gen Zers and millennials, how maybe they had a more, I mean, it has gotten a lot more progressive where things you might have not heard of 20 years ago, now are kind of being discussed more. And how, society does change as time goes on, and what might be, you know, inappropriate in the 1960s today. I mean, kids are learning that. And we talk a little bit about that with the old debate about sex ed education, and how what
Yeah,
topics
we covered
can,
this debate last week as well.
yeah, what topics can and can't be covered. And I think with today as well, maybe 30, 40 years ago, maybe discussing things like, I don't know, maybe the civil rights movement, because it was so new, maybe some people turn a blind eye to it, black liberation. But now today, as time has gone on and society's values have changed quite a bit, maybe you can talk about that now and maybe not offend people. And also maybe just being critical of the United States as well, because I think in the past, a lot of people were maybe not critical of the role of the I mean, yeah, maybe weren't critical of the role of the US because maybe they were going to be labeled a communist in the 1970s
Right.
or a socialist. But today, it's become more widely accepted among people. to, become more critical of the role of the US in the past, specifically with the role of Vietnam War, Iraq War, and other
Love
areas as
wars.
well. And also with World War II and how they put Japanese Americans into camps. And how if you said that in the 1960s or 70s, you'd be pretty much condemned from the community, I would assume.
Right. I mean, there was some counterculture rebellion during the late 60s, especially when it got to the Vietnam War.
I mean, yeah, you did see that, but I'm saying like even if he said it straight up, you probably would have gotten, talked
Probably
about
would
what
have been labeled like, oh,
a commie or something.
yeah.
But I mean, today, like in 2020, have you said, oh, yeah, I think that it was very crucial? I think it's pretty much the norm now. The US shouldn't have been in Vietnam. Yeah, it's pretty much the norm now. I think it's just how much that has changed. And that was just an example, but how much societal opinions have changed. And I mean, we've seen that over time with the way of what can be taught in school, what can't be taught in school, what children should learn about our country, what children should not learn about the US. And I think with this, it's just showing that, we're moving into a new wave of what can and can't be said. And I think with Juneteenth, it's opened a new door to what can be learned now in school and what used to be censored.
Yeah, I think you could start seeing that within conservative groups as well. I mean, we bash conservatives all the time. There's definitely this idea that conservatives have like very controversial opinions, and well, we could sit here and debunk it all day. They are getting deplatformed on Twitter, but that's like a whole other debate in itself. I think it's just the ties of which side the culture is leaning towards.
Yeah, you make a good point too with the culture because I think we do. I think that the culture wars are also something that has become very partisan as well.
Yep.
And like, we're not talking about culture in terms of pop culture in the way that, who puts out the next hip hop song or whatever. We're talking more about, American culture and the way that what values people hold, what people can learn, things like that. What you can say, also, are you going to be considered politically correct or incorrect? That kind of stuff. And I think that it has gotten a lot more left leaning. And I think it's because it's the youth.
It
And
is
I,
the
yes, and it's this whole new youth. And there was a whole, I don't know if you remember, this whole publication from the past. I could try to pull it up. And it was like Gen Z is going to become the most conservative
no, I don't
generation.
believe that whatsoever.
Well, there were beliefs that it could have happened. Gen
I
Z, it
mean,
was like
unlike
most
conservatives,
conservative.
conservatism definitely has an influence.
I mean, it does have an influence, but again, I think that this is probably, yeah, there was yeah, Business Insider put this out. And I remember this got a lot of talk back when it was created. I think it was like 2018, 2019. This was brought out. Yeah, and they were talking about how Gen Z was going to become, pretty much more
The next
conservative,
boomers. Even though the
and
boomers early on they were rebellious, I'm telling you.
I know they were, and I think the millennials were extremely liberal.
Yeah,
And at first you think that, oh yeah, the Gen Z are gonna be I mean, you saw it with Trump back in 2016. I think that was another thing as well. But I think nowadays, and this is the whole thing with the culture wars as well. You think that the Gen Z people are going to be, a little bit more conservative, but they have issues are more, it says here, Gen Z Republicans are more likely than Republicans and older generations to say the government should do more to solve problems. So, they do have some differences,
yep.
but I think that for the most part, I think that this is kind of an off-putting title here. It's not going to be as conservative as we realize. I think we're pretty much this Gen Z, this new generation of, I believe it was you're born from 1998 to 2012. So I think it's 8 year olds to about 8 or 9 year olds now to about 23 year olds, 24 year olds. I think that's the age group right now, which is kind of, it's a pretty decent size of the population. I think it's like 6, 7%, 5, 6% or something like that. How that um how that group of people how I think we were thinking that they were going to be more conservative just on how the political landscape was a couple years ago when this was written, but how today I think that has changed.
Yep, we're definitely seeing. I had to say culture war because I think culture war is a very loaded term, but we're definitely seeing the clash of ideology here.
Exactly. And I think it's going into the realm of education, again, everything else. All righty. All right. You want to take a little bit of a pivot now to what was going on with Candace Owens this week?
We'll highlight it for a second because I know you got to go soon.
Oh yeah, no problem, no problem. We could do a quick little Twitter checkup. We'll
On
see what's
good
going
old
on
Candace
here.
Owens here.
Yeah, Big Don was talking a little bit about this at the beginning as well. We didn't
Candace
really
Owens is
talk
saying
about
a lot of
this.
dumb stuff lately. I'm
Yeah,
telling you.
Big Don has been he's been talking a little bit about Twitter and Candace Owens. He brought this to my attention before the live stream tonight. And I haven't really been
Oh yeah,
looking
Candace
into
Owens also endorsed to Alex Jones. We love to see it.
yeah,
if only
so
she's, if only Candace Owens was as highly ranked on our tier list as Alex Jones. But I digress.
all right. So this was the tweet that did bring a lot of attention. As you can see, it actually her tweets I think it's the ratio of retweets. I forgot what that ratio is called. Retweets to messages, but hers always
It's not
come.
like Juneteenth.
Yes, she always makes. There's always a lot of messages, which means that a lot of people might counter her argument. But this one did get a lot of talk. It is
Yeah, this
to
one.
Paul. If you want to read that, Big Don.
Yes, I will read that. To politicians all across the world, Black Americans are considered the dumbest ethnic group with the lowest emotional IQ. In other words, the easiest political pawns to destabilize America from the inside out. All right, there's a lot of dog whistles here.
Go
First
for
of
it.
all, first of all, this. I mean, there's this whole notion. I mean, it kind of reminds me a bit of a couple of things. First of all, I mean, she brings up emotional IQ, but if we go to like raw, a lot of conservatives like to bring, especially far right wingers, like to bring up like the IQ gap between blacks and whites. In fact, Tucker Carlson recently had on Charles Murray, who infamously wrote the bell curve, saying that
Oh,
the
really?
yep he had him on, and the significance of the bell curve is Murray argued that the IQ gap between white and black people was due solely because of genetics and not because of environmental factors. And now there's obviously a great debate amongst going that, but the fact that she brings us like IQ here is definitely a little bit of a signal towards something. And there's also like the idea of, I guess, Democrats using minorities as like votes to, I guess, take over the world. In this case, Candace Owens.
Yeah, and I think that she has. I mean, she does make that argument with how. I mean, it is kind of known in the U.S. with the whole Black Americans do vote more with the Democratic Party, but you've seen that. We talked about this. We've talked about a lot of the same things here, but with history always changing, we do talk about it. But with Black Americans, I mean, they do tend to vote more left with the Democratic Party,
Yep.
and I think it's just with history how the Democratic Party was the first party to uh, have an African American president. We've
Yep.
seen
And
that.
then, and then they were the first party to kind of push civil rights. I mean, we saw this tour, even though it was a whole entire political shift with like the Dixiecrats and
Mhm.
all those other third parties, but the Democrats were definitely influential in terms of bringing about civil rights. And I think that's kind of where Black America kind of starts swinging towards Democrats.
Yeah, so I mean, for Candace Owens to try to make it about IQ, I think is pretty low to say
Yeah,
that.
this is a new low for Candace Owens, if you're asking me.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that I mean, she does say something about it's also a partisan kind of swing as well. But I mean, a lot of things that a lot of people on the right and the left do is they always try to make things political. But I think looking at it in a neutral stance, the first line, okay, Black Americans. I mean, that to try to make it about politics, okay, that's fine. But to try to make it about dumbest ethnic group, I mean, that is just absolutely a new low, derogatory. That's just racism 101.
Exactly. And the fact that she pretty much is just selling out I'm gonna say it. So she's selling out to Black America here in terms of the rhetoric she's using here to sort of make them seem like, okay, you're being exploited here. You're nothing but political pawns here. Where, I mean, they're human beings just like us.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely through this very vague lens in terms of how we understand sort of minority and political relations within this country. There's a lot of nuance to it that go beyond the realm of like, oh, these skins of people vote Democrat because of reasons.
Exactly. Yeah. And yeah, there's definitely that in that whole presence there. And yeah, I mean, you talk about the 1960s. I think that's when we saw the great shift from, African Americans, once Jackie Robinson was one of the biggest Republicans until you saw the big great shift in the mid 1960s. And then that kind of swung everyone to become more democratic and become more aligned with the Democratic Party.
Right.
And I mean, that's stayed true to this day. And I think with a lot of her tweets, yeah, I mean, but this one in particular, I mean, she's a black conservative. There, I think that since she's such like a minority inside the Republican Party, a black woman who's a Republican, I mean, she's going to have such a big say for other black conservatives that, and also for conservatives in general, how she's just a minority and within their party too. She has a lot of push in terms of that. And that's why also a lot of people do like what she says and they do subscribe to everything that she says. But yeah, I think we're going to leave it like that. You want to do a quick little Twitter check?
I say we call it. I mean, you got to go at this.
Yeah, I got to head it out sooner than later tonight, but let's go see here. Anything quick going on?
NBA stuff.
A
That's
lot of NBA stuff going on right now. Other than that, it's game sevens, news, Juneteenth weekend, a lot of things like that. Antifa's trending. I don't know what's going on. Somebody got hurt, I guess. I don't think we should play that.
Yep. We don't want to get. I'm not risking any demonetization here.
Yeah, we don't want to get any issues here, but yeah, that's going to leave it like that. Again, thank you all for tuning in today. Any last words, Big Don, before we start calling it a night?
Happy Juneteenth to everyone. I'm tempted to pull a G and stay black because that's the most important thing. So I mean, I'm gonna stay black because that's the most important thing. People, Candace Owens, stay black.
Alrighty. Yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in today. And always as a reminder, you can always go check us out afterwards. There's always a playback in the YouTube as well. So, if you can ever not make it to the 8 o'clock live stream, that's the time we go live, 8 p.m. Eastern time, by the way. So if you're watching on the West Coast, it's 5 p.m. But if you ever can't make it for whatever reason, you can always go check out that. We always replay it. And it's just not going to be live, but still, you can always go check us out on there. And also go check us out everywhere else on Instagram and on Twitter. Twitter, Peace and Chaos P1. That's Peace and Chaos P1. And on IG, really quick, you can go check us out on here, Peace and Chaos _podcast. That is Peace and Chaos _podcast. You can always go interact with us as well on there. Thank you all again for us. We're going to be doing, we're going to try to get that GeoGuessr to start moving around to.
Liz is drunk texting in the chat. She finally made it.
She made it.
Ban Liz Torelli, please.
We got ban all these people.
Ban all these people, please.
Wings of Redemption. Ban everyone. Yeah, we had a little fun with that last GeoGuessr, but yeah, we're gonna be definitely doing some more. Yeah, we're gonna get that all set up for you all. Maybe sometime next week, Thursday or Friday, we might do a live stream. It's a long one, but it's a fun one. I think that you all going to like it. For all those who are a part of the GeoGuessr community, a part of the Peace and Chaos program family, you're going to love that one. But yeah, that's going to be coming out hopefully next week or the week after. We also have a 2024 candidate thing we've been talking about. That's going to be very hype as well. So yeah. Anyways, thank you all again for tuning in today. I'm DJ Spin alongside the legendary Big Don. See ya.
Peace.